So every single year, especially around springtime and stuff, I get into long conversations with you guys and even share some stories about people who just don't know how to play well with animals. Now, on the phone with me is Christy Combs, Executive Director of the Wyoming Wildlife Advocates. And Christy, I think my definition of what you do as an advocate is you explain to people how to deal with bears so the bear doesn't explain it for you, which means the bear will probably eat their face. Is that about right?
That's pretty much it.
Okay, yeah, okay. So let's take a look at this. Feeding wildlife is a bad thing. We have Grizzly 399. Wasn't there someone just recently cited with feeding that bear?
Yeah, there's a homeowner just north of Jackson that's been supposedly just feeding moose, but putting out molasses-covered oats, and we know that Bear 399 and her 4 cubs have gotten into that, and I would be willing to bet other grizzlies over the years have gotten into that food, and which causes a safety concern not only for the homeowner but also for her neighbors as well.
All right. Okay, so figure not only has Mama Bear been eating molasses-covered oats, which, by the way, sounds pretty good to me. I mean, I might go over there and try it. That sounds pretty good, molasses-covered oats. But now the kids...
For a bear, that's lovely
Oh,
food.
my Lord, yeah. Okay, so that means that even the baby bears have learned this now. So it's one thing for Mama Bear, that's bad enough. But now you've got how many cubs who have been trained this way?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's the real fear here is that she's teaching her cubs on this is a good food source and this is where you should come in the future to find food. And, breaking those habits is not necessarily a hard thing, but we have to get the homeowner to stop feeding. And
Right.
As much as people are well-intentioned feeding wildlife, I know that people, want to help out animals and want to help wildlife and care about wildlife, but feeding is not the answer.
Okay, now on that note, where I'm at, I can look right across this little side street there, and there's this big, beautiful rolling golf course that I get to look at. Now, we got a lot of snow here, and I look at this whole herd of pronghorn, and they're kind of digging around trying to find where the food is, and they haven't been able to find any for several days now. It's tempting to go out there and give them a hand, but should I?
Absolutely not, especially with pronghorn. The thing that people don't think about is that these animals have very specialized guts and are used to eating a certain type of food, especially with pronghorn. They're, an obligate browser on sagebrush and only have very specific types of food that their guts can handle. And so something like hay or oats or grains of some kind would actually be very disruptive to their digestive tract. And we've seen incidences before where deer, for example, have been found dead with their bellies full of hay because they can't digest it. So once again, people think they're doing something good, but not really thinking about all the ramifications of introducing, some sort of foreign food to an animal that's not used to eating that.
So dumping a box of Cheerios, bad idea.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, now,
no, that would be horrible.
Reminds me of where I grew up. I grew up on a chain of islands off of the west coast of Florida, almost down to the Everglades there. And I would watch people go out with a loaf of bread and just start ripping off pieces of the bread and throwing them high. Boy, you want to talk about a swarm of seagulls. Dear Lord. But the bread is not good for the seagulls. They just can't handle that inside their gut. And I think, isn't that the same reason why we don't throw rice at weddings anymore?
Yeah, exactly. It was basically causing birds to explode. They can't, they're not used to eating rice and they shouldn't eat rice. So, we need to remember that animals are developed to survive in the environment that they've evolved in, and our human food is not what they need.
Right. So while I can understand, especially if I do look out my back window and I go, oh, there's Mama Bear, oh, look at those cubs, and I bet they're so hungry, and I feel sorry for them, I'm actually doing more harm than good by trying to help them.
Exactly. And putting, other people in danger possibly as well. I mean, if bears get accustomed to coming to a place and they start to associate humans with food, then usually that ends very badly for the bear and could end very badly for the people too. I mean, You just don't want to have a habituated bear that is looking to people for food.
Sure.
Bears are incredibly good at finding their own food, and as are all wildlife. I mean, we live in a cornucopia of food for them, and they know what they eat, especially bears. They're omnivores. They'll eat anything that they can come across, and there's plenty out there in nature for them to eat. We don't need to help them out.
Now, I did find some videos over the years of bears that when there's not enough food or they've eaten everything in the backyard, they start getting a little more curious and a little more brave. Next thing you know, they find their way to the back door. And Lord help anybody if they get into the house as well, because once they discover that kitchen and the pantry, and I've seen videos of that too, someone comes down in the morning and sees a bear rooting around in the pantry. That's actually happened.
Yeah, that happens more often with black bears, I would say, just because black bears are kind of more living closer to people. They're more, prolific across the United States and places like Colorado and Nevada. And so, yeah, there's definitely been situations where bears start getting bold and just think, why don't I just go open that door and see what's in there? If I found food on the back porch, there might be food inside too. And
okay.
That usually ends up very badly for the bear.
What
and the
about
bear
stuff we unintentionally leave around? Because I'm sure that there's stuff we've left in the yard that we didn't think we were baiting them, but we were.
Sure, yeah, things like barbecue grills, with grease and stuff on them, those should really be stored inside a garage or inside a building with a hard side. Bird seed needs to be to where it's inaccessible to bears, so either 10 feet off the ground and 4 feet away from any structure. Fruit trees are another thing that people don't necessarily think about, but is an attractant that can bring bears into your yard. So, and then garbage, of course, is like the number one attractant for bears. They have an incredible sense of smell and can smell miles away. And so leaving garbage out where they can find it is usually a bad recipe as well. And that's something that bears get into and then usually have to be euthanized because then they keep coming around looking for that garbage again.
And I think something you've touched on, which I'm just suddenly realizing, bears don't necessarily know, property lines. They don't think in those terms. So if you leave food in your backyard intentionally or not intentionally, and the bear has gobbled that up, then goes looking for more, you're right. You've just affected the entire neighborhood. And sometimes that means I grew up where there were alligators. I'm not so sure. Tell me about around here. So sometimes the neighborhood pet starts to look tasty.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that can be a thing. Usually it's not. I mean, bears are not going to look at a pet as a food source.
Okay.
It's going to be more of like an opportunistic thing where they come across a pet and like maybe a cat or something like that. Or it's more of a territorial situation that you get into where it's just another predator in the environment and they see it as a threat. And so it's a rare thing that it does happen, but it can certainly happen. And especially if you have bears in your neighborhood that are wandering around and looking for food. The best way to think about it is don't give the bear a chance to or a reason to stay on your property. Just let them pass through and, move on to find more natural food sources.
Thank you very much, Christy. Enjoyed having you on this morning.
All right. Thanks so much, Glenn.